Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. We begin today's class with the 11th Sutra. The Sutra says, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra says, Smriti is that vritti. Smriti is also one of the five vrittis. As you all know, we discussed about the five different vrittis and the reason why we have to understand them if we want to understand our mind. Because our mind is nothing but a combination of different vrittis. Each vritti succeeds the previous one. But they arise in the mind so fast in the chitta, which is also known as the mind stuff. They arise so fast that we hardly get a chance to distinguish them. But yogis can do it. And that is exactly what yogis set out to do. They are supposed to understand their vrittis before controlling them. And that is why a lot of discussion has been made. A discussion has been done in this Raj Yoga on the concept of vrittis. Vrittis, literally, as I told you, it simply means whirlpools. Whirlpools which are created in the chitta, which is compared to a lake. And Swami Vivekananda says, whenever you drop a stone in that lake, you get uh, concentric whirlpools. And these whirlpools are something like the vrittis, which are caused in the mind by external perception. So, there are so many ways these vrittis can be formed. And it has been classified, all our vrittis, good or bad, painful or non-painful, klishta or aklishta. Klishta means painful, aklishta means which are not painful. We have discussed this. But we have to remember what are the five vrittis. Till verse number 10, we came to the different types of, we discussed the different types of vrittis. First is pramana vritti, which is also known as direct perception. So pramana is a vritti which makes you perceive things as they are. It's a direct perception, a direct experience, and we discussed a lot about what constitutes direct perception. Then the second is viparya or false knowledge, or a vritti where we perceive something wrongly, or false knowledge. The knowledge that arises out of that vritti is a false knowledge because the perception itself is inaccurate. We gave the example of a snake and a rope. In the dark, we see a rope lying down and we imagine it to be a snake and react in the reactive mind, or the manas takes the form of the vritti. In fact, the chitta takes the form of the vritti, and the lower mind, which is known as the reactive mind. As I told you, this concept has to be made very clear. Chitta is the mind stuff, the entire mind stuff, and it assumes the form of manas. It behaves at a lower level, which is known as manas, and that is known as the reactive mind. A mind which reacts. We share our manas to some extent with all the animal kingdom. Animal kingdom has this kind of reactive mind which does not have the capacity to discriminate. But when we start discriminating, when we start developing our buddhi as a result of evolution of the human personality, we act more. The chitta takes the form of the buddhi. And of course, ahankara gets attached to both. So these are the four aspects. Chitta in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra constitutes the entire mind. the mind stuff. That is what Swamiji has translated it as. It's a very good translation. Chitta is the mind stuff. And the chitta has a tendency to take the form of manas or take the form of buddhi. Buddhi is the discriminative mind, which is also known as viveka. Viveka buddhi, we say. So the mind which can distinguish between Shreya and Preya, that which is good and that which is pleasant, and can make a distinction between the two and opt for the good and not for the pleasant one, only the pleasant, that is Preya. So, if that discriminative capacity is there, then our perceptions, whatever be our perceptions, good or bad, they are analyzed properly and we get a direct perception or a clear knowledge, that is pramana. So there are various ways of pramana. I will not go into that. Three types of pramana which we discussed. Pratyaksha, that is direct perception. Anumana, that is inference, which also can be a source of pramana. It can be called as a pramana vritti. And then of course aptavakya, that which we learn from supersensuous knowledge, the collection of supersensuous knowledge of great seers and rishis. That is known as aptavakya, that which has been validated by a lot of people, lot of rishis who have constantly experienced those truths, supersensuous truths, and affirmed its efficacy, or maybe have affirmed that experience again and again. So it is also aptavakya or pramana. It's also a pramana. And then we have false knowledge. False knowledge is viparyaya vritti. So whenever a vritti is formed in the chitta, the mind stuff, it has to be either perception if you are fully awake, or it can be a false knowledge. You, as I told you, you see the snake in the rope. You see the rope, but you imagine it to be a snake, and then the emotions of fear and other things are consequently felt by the person. So that is because of false knowledge. You don't perceive clearly. Maybe it is because of bad light, or maybe it's because of wrong vision, or incomplete. The sense organs are not competent to give you the direct perception, the clear perception. Anyway, false knowledge is viparyaya. Vritti is known as viparyaya. And the third type of vritti is vikalpa. It has nothing to do with perception. As you all know, according to the grammarian school, there's a grammarian Nyaya, Vaisheshika. Nyaya, they use a lot, the grammarian school, the Vaiyakaranis, they follow this school. They believe, they give a lot of importance to Shabda. Shabda means the spoken word. So it can be spoken, it can be even in the mind, but a word is involved. So Nama and Rupa, every word corresponds, has a particular name associated with it and a form associated with it. So the whole universe, according to these grammarians, they believe, they are also known as Spotavadins. Spota is the universal sound. If you uh, in the Bible it is said, in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. So it is something similar to what these grammarians believe, that the whole universe evolved out of Om, the primal sound. And Swamiji goes on to explain why Om is the primal sound. Because the words which, the combination of alphabets which, or vowels, which give rise to Om, U and Ma, they are the representation, the complete representation of the sound production, which starts at the throat, goes on the top of the mouth, the palate, and then it comes out and through the lips. And when you close the lips, the ma sound is there. A, u, and ma. So when you pronounce u and ma, it encompasses the entire range from throat to the lips. So the whole sound which comes out when you say om properly, u and ma in that sequence, it all merges into each other. The whole sound production is so om is supposed to be the representative sound, and they go to the extent of saying that it is the word om from which all the other words have come. The words, they are nothing but permutations. The sounds which we hear, they're all different permutations and combinations of this om. So om is a symbol, or they call it spota also. The spota vadins, they believe a lot in the spoken word. So that is why when you say verbal delusion, that means you hear something, but because of wrong knowledge, it is a type of knowledge which is a delusion which is caused by the wrong understanding of the word. So naturally, what happens is when you utter certain words, uh, you don't get an idea of what it is. You understand something else. You don't understand the right thing. And that is why that verbal delusion occurs. So this is the Vikalpa vritti. Vikalpa is that vritti which gives rise to verbal delusion and you misunderstand things. So that is a wrong vritti. Just as false knowledge is because of wrong perception, this is because of the wrong understanding of the word. So when you hear the word, you imagine it to be something else. You don't get the right meaning, and there is a wrong perception, which is a false perception or a false understanding. That vritti is also not good. So false knowledge, viparyaya and vikalpa vrittis. These are the two vrittis. And then we discussed about sleep, nidra vritti, which is abhava pratyaya, the feeling that there is nothing, but that ego is still there in sleep. The ego vritti, the ego is not a vritti, ego is something which attaches itself to these vrittis to give the experience of that you think, I think. Everybody has his ego, and that ego is what gives us an experience of with which we say, I think, I believe, I dream, I sleep. Even sleeping, sleep is a vritti where there is a continuous memory of negation, a negation of everything. So you don't, but it is still, we feel it. We get a feeling that we had a good sleep because of the memory of that sleep. When you get up, that feeling of negating everything, and you have an experience of that. If you did not have the experience, if it were not to be a vritti, then you would not have remembered it. So that's where we come to the last and the final, the most important vritti in our mind, and that is smriti. Smriti is memory. So now memory can come in various ways. Swamiji says memory can come from pramana vritti, direct perception, false knowledge, viparyaya, or vikalpa, and also sleep. For instance, when we hear a word, the word is like a stone thrown, as I told you, in the lake of Chitta. It causes a ripple, and that ripple rouses a series of ripples, because it's not the ripple which is caused by the throwing of one stone that is important. It gives rise to a series of ripples which slowly merge into the water. Slowly, it goes on creating concentric circles, ripples. These ripples are nothing but smriti, memory. It is not a present experience, but the chain of experiences, the chain of pramana vrittis it brings, it can cause a ripple, and this is known as memory. So that is how Swamiji has explained that. So memory is nothing smriti when vrittis of perceived subjects The subjects that you perceive do not slip away and through subsequent impressions come back into our consciousness. So when you get a vritti, say you see a tiger, that is like dropping a stone into the lake. One ripple is caused, is created around the stone. That circle expands, then there are concentric circles which go on expanding, and then these vrittis are nothing but memory, smritis. So we recollect, oh, what happens when we see a tiger? We have that fear of tiger in our mind. So a fear vritti comes. So many other vrittis come. We might have seen a tiger attacking and killing a person, either in the movies or in a book, or you might have experienced it ourselves. So that also imagination comes, and then you know that when there is a tiger, you have to just escape and run away. So the subsequent vrittis are known as smriti. They are actually, you are not perceiving them, but you are bringing back into memory, and you're not allowing the perceived subject or all the thoughts, all the vrittis connected with the subject to slip away. It's not allowed to slip. It continuously it is there. To give you some other example, you love somebody dearly and that person has died. He has died long ago, maybe, or maybe he has died uh, a few minutes ago, and you go and see the body. Then all the memories, when you just see, you just don't see the body. You don't live in the present. Immediately the mind goes into a smriti, vritti comes. One vritti of seeing the person, the dead person, gives rise to lot of old memories associated with that person. So for a long time, you lose yourself in this smriti vritti. So this smriti vritti has to be remembered as something which comes not only in the waking state. When when you see this kind of vritti in the waking state, it is known as smriti. But when that same smriti comes in a sleeping state, when we are in a sleeping state, when we get similar kind of ripple of memory, it is known as a dream. So dream is also a kind of smriti. It is a kind of memory which is not coherent, because in sleep the ego is not so active. That is why you see these things, but you loosely associate with all your old memories, and there is that willpower which is lacking. It is the will that makes all our perceptions coherent. We can rationally think, we can rationally imagine, we can have a direct perception, even verbal delusion, to have false knowledge, viparyaya and vikalpa vrittis. You have to be fully awake. But in sleep also, we can this memory can come in different ways. The direct perceptions, you get all the good memories. False knowledge, it will give rise to false uh, vrittis which are unnecessarily make you fear. When you see the rope, the fear of snake, the snake coming and biting you, and so many things you imagine. So that these vrittis come when you are fully waking, in the waking state. So there is when the will is strong, you see the uh, vrittis as memory or smriti, but when the will is weak, when you are asleep, you see the vrittis, they come as dream. The same memory which appears to you as smriti in the waking state becomes dream. It is known as swapna. So swapna is also a kind of memory. It is a kind of smriti. Dream is another form of ripple, which in the waking state we call as memory. When we say smriti, it is that equivalent of our swapna vritti which we see in sleep. In sleep, we see the dream vritti, the dream smriti, and when we are waking up, it is actual memory, the real memory, which is in which the willpower is attached, the kriya shakti or the willpower is attached. Now, the 12th sutra is very important, and we need to understand this sutra very much, because it's one of the most misunderstood subject in spirituality. When when any monk or anybody, why monks, even a sensible person says, or even the Bhagavad Gita says, we should have non attachment. So, according to Sri Ramakrishna, the whole essence of Gita is non attachment, anasakti. So, Mahatma Gandhi, in fact, went on to say, when he wrote the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, his own thoughts, his own views, he tried to express on the different verses of the Bhagavad Gita. You know what name he gave to that book? The name that he gave was Anasakti Yoga. There are so many yogas in Karma Yoga, but he preferred to call Gita as he named his Gita, the commentary on the Gita, as Anasakti Yoga. That is what Sri Ramakrishna also said. Perhaps there is a record or there is a mention that Mahatma Gandhi has read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So perhaps he was very much impressed by Sri Ramakrishna's quote. When Sri Ramakrishna once somebody asked him what is the essence of the Gita, he said it is very simple, just reverse. In Bengali, Tyagi, when you say, you just don't utter that word Tyagi. It sounds like Tagi, especially colloquial Bengali, Tagi. You just don't say. So, Tagi, if you reverse it, it becomes Gita, Tagi, Tagi, Tagita. You continuously, just like Valmiki could not utter Rama, Rama. So, Narada asked him to utter Rama. He said, no, I can't. He did not have Rama in his vocabulary. Then he said Mara. Mara means enemy. So he knew Mara. So he said, okay, you just say enemy 100 times. Mara, 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 Mara. So it becomes Rama. So also Thakur gave this wonderful illustration. He said, even if you pronounce Gita as Tagi, if you repeat Tagi 10 times, 12 times, that's what he said, you get the essence of the Gita. What did he mean? He says this non attachment or to be unattached is the essence of the message of the Gita. So, how to control the vrittis? Because in the beginning, the second sutra said, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga, or the state of samadhi, where we become one with our supreme self, our own self. That state can be attained only if the vrittis are quietened. The vrittis do not occur. Then we discussed what these vrittis are. Now, how to control them? After knowing what these vrittis are, what are the 5 types of vrittis? We will discuss in great detail what are these klishta vrittis and aklishta vrittis, painful vrittis and non-painful vrittis, aklishta. But to before that, how to control these vrittis, how to make it aklishta, how to make it less painful, how to remove the kleshas is another totally different topic. We will come to that in the subsequent sutras. But the 12th sutras, uh, abhyasa and tyaga, non-attachment. So vairagya, the word vairagya is used. So people have a very uh, confused idea as to what this non-attachment or vairagya is. They think vairagya is not for householders, it's not for us. People, the very word vairagya gives a kind of, it it strikes a person with some kind of fear. So there is a beautiful passage of Swami Vivekananda in the when he went to California. They say when he went to California, when he went to USA for the second time, when he went to the West for the last time in 1900, he gave some series of lectures in Oakland and the Bay Area as it is known in California. So they are some of his best talks because he knew he did not have much time to live in this world. So he wanted, and perhaps he also had a premonition that this would be his last visit to America. So according to Gargi or Mary Louis Burke, he gave some of his best talks or lectures in on the Californian coast, San Francisco, Oakland, and there is a church, Oakland Unitarian Church, where he gave a series of talks the chair on which he sat, the podium from which he spoke is still there in that Oakland church, Unitarian church. It's such a famous church that the vibrations may have been so strong that it was the first, it was the same church where the first meeting of UNESCO was held. UNESCO headquarters was shifted to Paris much later. But the idea after the UN was formed, the idea that UNESCO should also be created, United Nations Educational, Cultural and Scientific and Cultural Organization. So to use education, science and culture, living out religion and politics has been the goal of UNESCO. And this idea came in this Unitarian, the first meeting of UNESCO was held in this Oakland Unitarian Church. It's a beautiful church, more than 1,500 people could sit, and Swamiji had to speak without microphone. In those days, he had to speak without microphone, but it was always overflowing. So in some of these lectures, he gave a very clear idea. He was in a very different mood, and there he spoke about Jesus Christ. So he used to mention about Jesus Christ and his wonderful renunciation, and also about his own master. So he gave a very emotional talk, not there, but somewhere in the western coast. And he said, he used this word, that this most misunderstood word of non-attachment or vairagya is so much feared by people who hold their position so dear in this world. Everybody loves the world, no doubt. The Prakriti is something which we everybody enjoys and loves. There's no doubt about it. But that doesn't mean that one needs to be attached to everything in the Prakriti. That which can completely subjugate you, that which can reduce you to a mere animal, a wonderful human being which has a capacity to develop the higher three layers of personality, the Vijnanamay Kosha and the Anandamay Kosha. It should not come down to the level of Manomay Kosha, Pranamay Kosha and Annamay Kosha merely. They are just there to support us, to make us lead our life in a proper way. We want a strong Annamay Kosha, strong Pranamay Kosha, and strong mind also, Manomay Kosha, so that we can transcend them and try to live on the higher two planes of Vijnanamay Kosha, that is Buddhi, and the Anandamay Kosha, which is pure bliss. But that, when does it happen? When there is detachment. What do you mean by detachment? The mind has to be detached to the sense organs. That is the idea. Or the vrittis. These vrittis, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So these vibrations are not allowing us to see reality as it is. It is always coloring. It is always trying to grossify or make the things gross for us. So this going away from gross is nothing but vairagya. So vairagya is not something in which you have to give up anything. It is just the attachment which one has to give up. But this is a very subtle thing to understand. And Swamiji, in the course of these lectures, he says people are so fond of their sense objects and the lower stages, their lower levels of their personality, especially the pranamaya kosha and the manomaya and the annamaya kosha, the body, that 90% of the people think it is are terrified by the very thought that they have to give up their possessions. It is a terror which is more dangerous than the terror of terrorists and all the big wars and all, to such an extent that we don't mind fighting wars for this property, for wealth and for power and position. Even death, physical death is welcome for many people when they are so much attached to. So that is why this non-attachment, the mind to have non-attachment must be clear, good and rational. That's why Swamiji in his memorable words when he was talking about Sri Ramakrishna, he says Sri Ramakrishna's message is only this. to practice this Vairagya, and Vairagya should be part and parcel, not because you hate anything, not because you hate the Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha and the world, but this detachment is so essential to to uh, establish yourself on a firm, secure, and blissful basis. To establish that, you have to learn detachment. There is no way. That's why practice abhyasa and vairagya, tan nirodha. Abhyasa and vairagya, through abhyasa and vairagya, these vrittis have to be subdued. The sense inputs which give rise to vrittis have to be subdued. And this subduing of these vrittis, for many people who are very fond of their sense objects, it's like a terror. So, Swamiji says, live your life in such a way with that vairagya. What will happen as a result of your vairagya and abhyasa? When you make your mind calm, Swamiji uses a perhaps a slightly negative term to assess its impact on a worldly mind, a mind which is terribly attached to his things, gross things. So he says, let your actions, let your thoughts, let your behavior be molded according to the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna to such an extent that it will terrorize the worldly people. I mean, what do you mean by terrorizing? By meditating on Sri Ramakrishna, by imbibing his ideas and ideals. How can we be a source of terror? He went to the extreme of saying that it will cause terrors because the most painful thing for a person who is attached to his world, or to his wealth, to his other things which he thinks is very dear and permanent, is to give up those things. So to speak of vairagya for many people is like a is like telling them to fight a war. It terrorizes them. It simply terrorizes them. So Swamiji says it brings terror into the minds of worldly people. So that's why when people asked him, why did you not speak about your master, Sri Ramakrishna? He said, how can I speak? My master never came down it was very difficult to bring him on the mental plane. He always lived in a rarefied atmosphere where coming down to the gross was a pain for him. To drag him to the level of the body was so difficult that he lived very spontaneously. His mind would assume the form of buddhi and go up and refuse to come down. So it has to be cajoled to come to convert his personality, or bring his personality, his mind down to the lower planes, so that he can communicate with ordinary people. And he found it difficult. It was spontaneous, very easy for him to raise his mind. We find the opposite true. Our mind is being dragged down to the world, and it takes a lot of effort, lot of practice and detachment, practice of detachment, control, abhyasa, vairagya we require. And we can't even calm down our minds. You see, the body is always absorbed in gross things. We cannot live without the gross. So he says, how can I talk of Thakur who never could bring his mind down, had to force his mind down, had to tell, I want to drink water, I want to drink a little water. That was a small desire which he had to force himself before he went into samadhi. And for us, when we meditate, we are always eating, drinking, and doing so many things. We are watching TV, we are reading good books. But Thakur would drop everything, and even the desire, he says, I keep a small desire as drinking water, that so that the thirst will bring the mind down. So you can imagine what a type of mind is required to even conceive or to imagine or to even perceive the kind of life Sri Ramakrishna lived. To drag the mind down, it took efforts. Whereas our mind is down, to take it up, we require a tremendous effort. We cannot give our attachment. That is why the vrittis can only be controlled. There is no shortcut. No person can meditate if he doesn't have this abhyasa and vairagya. So that's why Swamiji says, gives a lot of importance to this verse, the 12th verse in Patanjali's Yoga. The mind, to have this non-attachment, must be clear, good and rational. You see, these are very important things. First, it should have the pramana vrittis. Most of the time, you can't live on false knowledge. This life is too valuable to be wasted on false knowledge. So pramana, we have to be very careful about the vrittis. So if a vritti has nothing to do with it is not a pramana vritti. If it is a klishta vritti, we have to give up. Otherwise, we will have to suffer the consequences, and pain is the result. So the pain is the result of false knowledge. So what is that false knowledge? The scripture says false knowledge is holding the permanent, holding the impermanent to be permanent. That is false knowledge. You know a thing will not last, and you think it will be eternally be yours. So uh, if a thing is not eternally yours, not going to be eternally yours, then is there any point in spending our whole life, day in and day out, running after those things? That which, so that at the mind to have this kind of non-attachment, when you say vairagya, what is the kind of mind Swamiji says we should have? It should be clear, good and rational. What do you mean by good? Good means it should follow the Shreya, that which is good, that not that which is pleasant. If the pleasant is something which will be only temporary, and we are giving up the permanent for this temporary pleasure, then it has to be given up. It may be pleasant, but it is not good. So the mind should be clear. It should have only pramana vrittis which are completely true, which are very rational, good and clear. We should not have any kind of viparyaya vritti, false knowledge or verbal delusion. We should never jump into conclusions. We jump into conclusions because we do not focus on the thought. When something is being said, we do so many other things. We don't attach our annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha and manomaya kosha and completely merge them in the buddhi, so that as Swamiji said, Sri Ramakrishna had converted his whole personality into his mind. I could see him as a evolving mind. I could not see him as a body. The body was not significant for him. So when that state comes, when that kind of focus, that kind of concentration comes by regular practice, abhyasa, because it has to be practiced. The abhyasa means practicing whatever sadhana, whatever vrittis we use to cancel the old vrittis. Japa is nothing but creating a vritti, a constant direct vritti, a pramana vritti. Japa, the name of the Lord, or the process of japa or prayer or repeating the scriptures, are using the pramana vrittis to cancel or nullify the effect of false knowledge, of viparyaya and the vikalpa vrittis, and also sleep. So Turyanand used to say, আমি ঘুমকে ঘুমিয়ে দিয়েছি. I mean, I have put sleep to sleep. I have put my sleep to sleep. That means I don't need sleep to get rest. Turyanji was one who compared the four states of deep sleep. That's why his name was Turyananda. Turiya is a fourth state of transcendence, where so he made it a sadhana to see what is this waking state, what is this dream state. So he became a witness. Even he wanted to know what happens when we really sleep, when we go into deep sleep. So these different states which a man passes throughout the day without even being conscious of either of them. He just passes through very randomly. Oh, now I am awake. Now I go back to sleep. Or I just, in between, I dream. And then again I get up, again I dream. I just randomly pass through all these three stages. But Turyananji said, no, I'll control all the three states. I want to see. He once started meditating. He wanted to reach, of course, he had reached the state of Turiya, but he wanted to see what happens when exactly do I get that vritti of sleep. He was a Raj Yogi, practiced Raj Yoga. So he wanted to know what exactly is this Nidra Vritti. Why do they call it a vritti? If it is just a wave, then we have to understand it. That abhava pratyaya. Abhava pratyaya means the feeling of nothingness. So the feeling of nothingness, if it is repeated again and again in a continuous procession, then you say you have a deep sleep, a good sleep. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't happen, then sleeplessness can cause a lot of mental problems, because the quota of nidra vritti, among the five vrittis, you should have a minimum amount of nidra vritti also to have a balanced mind, till we of course transcend sleep. So turiya vritti is turiya, the state is something which goes above this nidra or the dream, the swapna or sushupti, not sushupti, jagrat, swapna and sushupti, the deep sleep. So when you go beyond that, so is that possible? Yes. When the even the nidra vritti is stopped, when that vritti is also stopped, the mind is totally under your own control. So that is why this non-attachment, the scientific reason behind Vairagya, it's not because the prophets say or because the books say. Every book seems to tell us that you should have some kind of Vairagya, renouncing. Jesus said, Buddha said, Buddha's whole religion is based on renunciation. But why? Why do you renounce? Why does it terrorize people? Why are we afraid to renounce at least even the gross things? Leave alone the subtle things, but we are reluctant to renounce even the gross things, because we are afraid of that detachment, because we hold those things to be very dear to us, and not knowing, it is a wrong knowledge that these temporary things can give us permanent happiness. We are still holding on brutally. I mean, it's a brutal truth. It terrorizes people to get hold, or I mean, uh, get rid of the old habits. The old habits have told us that this is good, wealth is good, we should have wealth. So if somebody comes and tells you, it terrorizes you to give up your dear possessions. So it takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength to even think that one has to detach, one has to give up one's thoughts, even to give up one's thoughts which are dear to us, thoughts which are, we know are false knowledge, we know are verbal delusions, we know they are viparya and we know they are vikalpa vrittis. Time and again, we are told, we know, our experience gives us a hint. It may not give us a direct hint, but it gives us an anumana. Every person knows, as Yudhishthira said, every day people are dying and people think they will be immortal in this body. They know, they see, and he says that is the greatest wonder which I can see in front of me. Every person thinks or lives his life as if he is going to live eternally. And Yudhishthira says, is it not a wonder? Because this false knowledge or this viparya vritti is coming again and again. False knowledge that I am eternal when I am not eternal in this body. Now it has become a habit to live with this viparya vritti. So somebody comes and tells you that if you want to be immortal, you should focus less on this gross body, and then he says, no, 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 I shall not leave that. It terrorizes me because of the habit. That is exactly what Swamiji says. Why Abhyasa and Vairagya is necessary for the mind, because each action which we do in the world is like pulsations quivering over the surface of a lake. If the lake is calm, then there is no action. But when the vibration dies out, what happens? Does the lake become calm? Suppose our vrittis stop. We somehow manage to stop the vrittis. What happened? Should they have not become a habit. We have just forcibly stopped the vrittis. When the vibrations have been formed and then it has been stopped, what is left? Swamiji says that is samskaras. The impressions are left on the chitta. Just as the waves of the ocean, when they pass over sand, they leave some uh, troughs and I mean, there are uneven. The surface is created on the shore. It is not even unless the water completely levels it. There are, because of the waves, the surface of the sand has ups and downs. So these are the impressions which are left on the sand. So also in the mind, the lot of impressions, because of this false knowledge, viparyaya vritti, continuous viparyaya vritti, continuously if there is a verbal delusion, that is vikalpa vrittis, we are always misunderstanding things. Those misunderstandings or those ignorant things which are not real become a habit. They are left on the mind, they combine together and become a habit. So Swamiji makes that famous quotes the famous British proverb, that habit is second nature. People, he says, what do you mean by second nature? He says habit is not just second nature, habit is your first nature and the whole nature of man. Why is it second nature? Because if you see our past, we are what our habits have made us. If I have been habitually thinking that I am an evil man, I will become evil. If I habitually think that money is everything in my life, I will but run after money. No amount of others telling me, you have to give that up, says you are a fool. I have made a habit of thinking. The Vikalpa Vritti has been created periodically, continuously in my mind, that money making is the only security I can have in my life. That Vikalpa Vritti, though it is false, it is still a Vikalpa or a Viparyaya Vritti. And that Viparyaya Vritti has become a deep habit. So even if I don't want to have that Vritti, it comes. So that is what Duryodhana said to Krishna. He said, why did you, the whole war was because of your Vikalpa or Viparyaya Vrittis. Mainly it was Vikalpa Vrittis, because he was being told not to fight this war. He could not, he was a bundle of habits which were impressions created by wrong thinking. That's why Swamiji said you should think, you should have good thoughts, should have strong thoughts, and you should have clear, good, and rational thoughts. But he was not being rational. And then when he was asked, why did you do? He says, I don't know. I'm a victim of my habits. I'm in the prison house of my habits. So he said, Janami dharmam nachame pravrutti. I know what is dharma. My rational thinking, rational thinking which was because of my guru Dronacharya, who had taught both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, he had given me all the positive, the pramana vrittis to live a good life. But somehow the Vikalpa vrittis had become a habit in my character, in me. Janami dharmam nachame pravrutti, but I can't do it because my habits force me to do the other thing, practice adharma. And he says, I know what is adharma. I have those vrittis. I don't have the Vikalpa vrittis. I know that, but just having Vikalpa vrittis will not do. The wrong habits, samskaras have already been created with with lot of jealousy, with lot of hatred, uh, which was not controlled in the beginning, and that made him the character he was. So he says, I know what is adharma. Not that I don't know, not that these things were not taught to me by our guru, who was common guru. Dronacharya was the common guru. So all the shastras, all the good things of life, character, about morality, ethics, everything was explained to both of them. And Yudhishthira followed them. He could not follow it. Duryodhana could not follow it. That is why he says, I know what is adharma, but my habits, which are the whole nature, it's as Swamiji says, habit is not just second nature. We are what our habits have made us. So it is our first nature also and the whole nature. Everything that we are is a result of habit. Because, but Swamiji says don't have to worry about it, because just as bad habits are there, we can unmake and make it anytime. If there is a consolation, Swamiji says, just because it is our habit is our first nature. It's not just our second nature. Habit is not second nature. It's our first nature and our only nature, the whole nature of man. Because if the consolation is that if it is only a habit, then we can make it and unmake it. So what's the purpose of repeating, doing sadhana or upasana? The answer is very simple. Japa doesn't do anything miraculous. It just creates a counter pramana vritti to subdue or to cancel all the vikalpa and the viparyaya vrittis which we have been thinking. So our samskaras, the vibrations which are passing out of our mind, each one is leaving a samskara or a result in the chit, the mind stuff. So that forces us to think in a particular way. When Duryodhana said, Janami adharmam nachame nivrutti, I know what adharma is, but my mind again and again thinks of those negative things. However much I try, I go on thinking the same negative things. And his character was a clear proof of what habits do to a person. So Swamiji says our character is the sum total of these marks or these samskaras. According as some particular wave prevails, it takes the tone of that. So depending on what wave, what inputs we give, the corresponding wave from smriti, from memory, from our old memory, which is nothing but because of our habits, the samskaras give rise to a corresponding train of thoughts. So the train of thoughts, if they are full of joy, that shows that your samskaras were such that you were used to some pramana vrittis which always taught you to think rightly, think rationally, think think properly. And those vrittis, whenever you see certain things, you see the world as a blissful world. And the same person in the same situation thinks the world is bad. According as so Swamiji says, our character is the sum total of all these samskaras or these marks. And according as some particular wave prevails, if the wave of happiness, if the wave of joy, if the wave, if we are uncomplicated in nature, then the wave of simplicity, the humility, and the wonderful joy which a child has. If you just observe a child and you just keep two people, let them be alone in nature and see how they react. The child is curious about everything. Everything that he sees around him is good, beautiful, and he is in a position to inquire about everything without any preconceived notion or some kind of uh, prejudice on pride. But the other person who's full of pride, prejudice, and conditioning, a particular conditioning of the mind, even if he is placed in good circumstances, his mind becomes depressed, weak, and he just cannot even bear it. So, if the good prevails, one becomes good. If wickedness prevails, one becomes wicked. If there is joyfulness, one becomes happy. So, the character is the sum total, and as the particular wave of vritti which takes place, which continuously arises because of our old samskaras, they can make us happy or unhappy depending on our samskaras. And what sadhana does is, the only remedy for bad habits is to continuously create the counter habits. And all the bad habits, all the bad impressions have to be flattened or countered by this. There is no other way. That's why Swamiji says, go on thinking good and holy thoughts continuously. So that is the need for constant japa is something which we do continuously to suppress these base impressions. These impressions cannot be wished away. They come again and again. So they have to be continuously countered to achieve a semblance of sanity in our mind. To achieve a semblance of sanity, we have to continuously suppress these base impressions. And if we do not know how to do it, then our life can become miserable. Our life becomes miserable because we are a slave of our previous habits. The vikalpa vrittis, the viparyaya vrittis of the past and the bad smritis. Memories can be good. The bad memories come to the surface. If they come continuously, then one has to counter it. There is no other way. You simply can't tell your mind, because of the old samskaras, that don't think bad, don't think anything which is troublesome. When depressive thoughts come, when we try to stop it, it doesn't seem to stop, because the vritti is, the ripple is already caused. The stone has been thrown and one ripple gives rise to other ripples, and you just can't say now I'll stop the ripples. The vrittis will continue according to our samskaras. Swamiji says there is a tendency in our mind to reproduce those vrittis, and we have filled our mind with a lot of clutter, a lot of viparya and vikalpa vrittis, and these vrittis are constantly agitated. Every time we throw a stone, these vikalpa and viparya vrittis are agitated, they come to the surface, and then we complain that why do you do these evil thoughts? You may tell us not to have joyful thoughts, happy thoughts, but how difficult it is. That is because we have created that habit of allowing the samskaras of these viparya and vikalpa vrittis to be deep rooted in our mind. So it will take time, but Swamiji says there is hope. Go on doing good, go on thinking holy thoughts continuously. That is the only way to suppress base impressions. And that's why he says, never say that a man is hopeless, because he is just a bundle of habits. He represents a character which is nothing but a bundle of habits. So, though no man can be condemned eternally, saying that he is a man of bad character. Nobody is of either good character or bad character. It's only a bundle of habits which can be changed, and the person who has a bad character becomes one with a good character if his bundle of habits are replaced. So that is why Valmiki became the great saint. He could not even repeat Rama. Rama. So Narada said, okay, you repeat Mara. Mara means enemy. Mara means enemy. So he was very familiar with that word. So okay, repeat Mara, 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 Mara. It became Rama. And that transformed his personality. So the sadhana that we do is nothing but creating these good impressions continuously, because it doesn't, the habits have become so deep rooted that they keep arising. The thoughts, the vrittis keep on, the whirlpools, the vrittis continuously come up to the surface, and they have to be flattened again and again and again. So that's why Swamiji says, never say a man is hopeless. However hopeless he may be, just represents a character which are nothing but a bundle of habits which can be checked by new and better ones. So since character is repeated habits, only repeated habits can reform character. So now we can understand how difficult. That's why Swamiji says in the 12th, Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa means practice. Vairagya means not to create further vikalpa vrittis. Vairagya means not to create further wrong vrittis so that your task becomes more difficult. Continuous, the 13th, then we come to the 13th one. Continuous struggle to keep the vrittis perfectly restrained is practice. What is Abhyasa? The continuous struggle. When you say Abhyasa, it means continuously repeating. Say you have a sacred word which has been given by your guru. When you repeat it, it is a big struggle. You keep repeating for some time, then you forget it, then you continuously repeat it. The moment some other thoughts pop up, you just subdue it. So, what is practice? It is the attempt to restrain the mind in the chitta, the manas in the chitta, to form, to prevent, and going out into waves. So, our chitta always has a tendency to be reactive in nature and to form uh, through that portion of the mind which is known as manas, the reactive mind, to form a continuous ripple of vrittis. That has to be prevented, but it is not a day's job. It has to be done with lot of effort. The continuous effort or struggle is known as abhyasa. Everything can be done by abhyasa, so repeated efforts help us to lessen the impact of these wrong vrittis which are trying to dominate us. There was a beautiful picture which I saw where a dog is trying to control the person who is taking it for a walk, and the dog is running here and there. So finally, it is not the person who is controlling the dog, but the dog who is making the his master run here. So you have to be master of your mind. So you have to determine what type of vrittis occur in your mind. You have to decide what form the chitta takes. The mind stuff can take the form of a reactive mind and make you miserable, but you have to stop it. You have to practice long enough to tell the mind not to uh, take the form of a reactive mind and get miserable day in and day out. So we have to loosen ourselves from this prison house of these habits. These habits which have these vikalpa vrittis and all have imprisoned us and made us think in a particular irrational way day in and day out. And because of that irrationality, we are forced to be what we really don't deserve to be. We don't deserve to be sad. We don't deserve to be suffocated in our day to day dealings. We don't need to be miserable. But the thoughts of misery have been encouraged or by us, the Vikalpa vrittis and the Viparya vrittis have been encouraged for a long time. So we can't wish them away. They have to be countered, and there is a word which is known as Pratipaksha Bhavana. Bhavana means feeling. To create a opposite thought or opposite feeling, because thoughts cognition the is supported or strengthened by our emotion. Emotion is like the water. If there is a seed planted, the soil is definitely there, the mind stuff, chitta. But the moment you pour water, the sprouts start coming up. So you have to stop pratipaksha bhavana. You have to stop that feeling, that emotion from getting attached to the thought. The moment you separate this emotion and the thought, then you can think rationally. That's why they say in a fit of anger, you take wrong decisions. Why is that? Because your anger, the emotion of anger, uh, supersedes or tries to control the thought, and you can't think rationally. So, to think rationally, one has to separate this klesha, klishta vritti. We will discuss that in our next class. The klishta vritti is that which gives you pain. So first you have to identify what is a klishta vritti and how not allow, learn how not to allow the negative emotions of fear, of confusion, of depression and anger and all those things to get connected to our thoughts. Thoughts by themselves are not bad. The cognitions which we have, which we get as a result of the sense inputs that we get day in and day out, we are exposed to day in and day out, they are by themselves not dangerous, but the type of emotion that gets attached to these, and that makes the vritti klishta or aklishta. We have not discussed that. We have just discussed the 5 types of vrittis, but the basic category is klishta vrittis and aklishta vrittis, painful vrittis and non-painful vrittis. So that which gives you pain have to be countered by the aklishta vrittis, like reading scriptures, doing japa and all those things. So these aklishta vrittis and what klishta vrittis are, we will discuss in the next class. Now if there are some questions you can ask. We have come to Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa is the continuous attempt to restrain the mind or the chitta to, to prevent it from going out in as waves. And they are dangerous if the waves are of manas rather than buddhi. The waves of buddhi are much better because it enables you to think clearly and in a proper way. But if it is, if your chitta takes the form of the manas and it becomes highly reactive, then there is hardly any difference between animals and human beings. We degrade ourselves to that level because the emotions take charge and our thoughts are confused, colored, and they are weakened, and the vrittis create a total chaos in our mind. So to prevent that is the goal of Abhyasa and Vairagya. So Vairagya should be seen from this positive thing. Vairagya is not because the scriptures say that to have this positive. It is only because uh, Vairagya prevents all the Vikalpa and Viparya vrittis to gain control of our minds. So Vairagya is necessary for our own survival, the survival of our mind to lead a happy, rational and a peaceful and joyful life. Okay, so if there are some questions you can ask. You can even ask in the chat. Yeah. There is a question, I'll just try to answer. Are vrittis a matter of mind, or what is the external aspect of a vritti? Are vrittis external habits or activities? It's a good question. Vrittis are reaction to the external things. The external, what is known as external, is just the suggestion that produces a vritti. Swamiji gave the example of a pearl oyster. A small grain of sand goes into the oyster, shell of the oyster, and it immediately creates a secretion which becomes a pearl. So there is the suggestion, which is the sand particle, which just uh, gives the suggestion for the oyster to secrete a particular juice or particular secretion which solidifies and becomes a pearl. That's how pearls are formed. That's what Swamiji tries to explain. So this suggestion, the sand grain of sand, which creates, which forces the oyster to secrete, is something like a vritti. The vrittis are formed only if the external world is the suggestion, and the vrittis are the reaction to that suggestion. Now, how you react, depending on how you react, will determine the nature of the vrittis. If it is a totally reactive vritti of the manas, then they can be vikalpa or viparya vrittis, which can be extremely harmful. It can be based on wrong knowledge or wrong perceptions because of the wrong emotion getting attached. When you are angry, they say you don't use your logic. You simply surrender to your anger and you take wrong decisions. So vikalpa vritti comes. Viparya, you don't even have the patience to hear what the other person is telling you, and you just jump into some conclusion and fight with him. So that is known a classic example of vikalpa vritti. You just don't imagine or think deeply or rationally as to what that person wants to convey. It's not just the sound, but what he wants to actually convey. He may be using the wrong word, or maybe not the, he may not be articulating properly. So these this should be they are the external, they are not just external, they are reaction to the external aspect. So I think my answer, are you satisfied? Are the vrittis external? They are not external, they are reaction to the external stimuli. The stimulus which you get from the external world creates a kind of reaction which is a vritti. Okay, the next question is, Swamiji said that we should sleep less. Is this because those who practice japa and don't require? Yeah, that is absolutely true. Not only Swamiji, though, all the scriptures, including Turiyananji, says if you can meditate properly, then you don't need much sleep. Sleep is nothing but a vritti which calms down the waves of your mind and just fixes one particular abhava vritti. I discussed what a nidra vritti is. So a abhava vritti continuously, it's just like a kind of crude meditation, a forced meditation, you may say. It's a type of forced meditation where when you're not thinking of anything else but abhava, there's nothing. So that vrittis, when unconsciously you are restraining the vrittis, the dream vrittis also stop. The waking vrittis are of course not there when you are sleeping, but the dream vrittis also stop, and one vritti takes charge, and that is abhava vritti, that is nidra, and that gives you kind of rest. But it is a temporary rest. It is only because the mind is exhausted and is forced to, otherwise it will not survive. The mind will, now that's why people become mad if they can't sleep properly, if they don't have higher spiritual practices to back them. So if they can live and counter the waves themselves, then it is fine. But otherwise, deep sleep is required. Somehow or the other, even people sometimes take tranquilizers to get good sleep. Otherwise, they will go mad. So it is very much necessary, as you said. But if you meditate, a few minutes of meditation, Swamiji says in his Raj Yoga, is as good as hours of good sleep, because the hours of sleep, not good sleep. We normally don't get good sleep most of the time because of intense vrittis taking place and confusing us in the dream. In the waking state itself, we have so many vikalpa and viparya vrittis which create a havoc when we are waking. So you can imagine in dream they get more confused because there is no willpower, and those that confusion leads to more vrittis and so many ripples that it makes you restless. So the body, mind, everything get exhausted. So that's why you yearn for some good sleep somehow, either naturally, or you take medicines to, so that the abhava vritti saves you. So it's like an escape mechanism. When the too much of vrittis create havoc in a person, and when the body can no longer sustain it, the prana and the annamaya kosha forces the mind to take the abhava vritti and sleep. So at least by through good sleep, you come back to normal, you get some kind of energy back. But if you can meditate, it is a good replacement, or even a few minutes of good japa, or if you consciously create one single vritti for a long time through japa and prayers and other things, then you don't need so much sleep. Okay. Okay, now there is one thing, one more question. There are just two more questions, I'll finish. How do we control vrittis when concentrating on daily work tasks when we are not doing japa or meditation? Oh, it is japa and meditation is just one technique. Karma yoga is another technique. When you focus on the work at hand and do it with total focus and total concentration, then you don't have the other vrittis to disturb you. It is as simple as that. It's not just through japa and meditation that you can control the vrittis. But if you do the work haphazardly, if you allow the vrittis to take, when you are doing work, you that's why they say one should preferably not do the multitasking. You should not multitask, because multitasking creates a habit where when you are doing a particular task, you allow the other thoughts also to come. So you can't be doing that. So by practicing awareness meditation, to be aware of the thing which you are doing, that it's as good as japa. So you focus on the thing at hand, think of nothing beyond that, and create only one type of vrittis which are relevant for that kind of work. Then it is as good as meditation. Okay. And when we suppress vrittis, aren't they still there? Can we work on eradicating them at the root? Yes, as I told you, I think many times, there is a state known as Dagda Bija Avastha. Vrittis are created because of some samskaras which can be compared to seeds. So when we suppress the vrittis, they don't die. They are still there. They are not expressing themselves. So repression, when you do it unconsciously, it is known as repression. When you do it by counter thoughts, then it is known as suppression. Not suppression, but a kind of suppression is the wrong word. But anyway, comes very close to Pratipaksha bhavana is what is meant by suppression. You just don't suppress, but you cancel it by a positive thought. Suppression means you just don't think, but don't allow it to come. That is repression. And when we do that, it becomes positively harmful, because you are not destroying it at the root. The seed can be destroyed by continuous japa. Japa has the bija which burns that. To burn the samskaras, you need something, some artificial or some great effort. and that becomes easy through japa and meditation. But if you can't do that, even through karma, through continuous karma, though it may be very unpleasant, by doing your duty with lot of focus, you can counter those karmas and samskaras. That is what happens in karma yoga. That's why if you can't do japa, at least do the karma which you are supposed to do with full attention, and that continuous action and the thought behind it will result in uh, removing those samskaras. Okay. And the last is that the capacity of chanting Om or the Guru given mantra can overpower or control negative vrittis. But what if a good vritti comes, then can japa amplify the good vritti? Yes, the good vritti, what is good, in the ultimate, it's not a question of good or bad vritti. Bad vrittis are to be countered with good, and you have to throw both. Because you see, the thorn, Thakur gives the example of one thorn. The function of a thorn is to just to remove the thorn which has got stuck. That doesn't mean you run around with the thorn with which you have removed the old thorn. So you have to throw away both. But in the beginning, to counter bad thoughts is very essential. And if you can't do it, then there's no question of giving up the good vritti. The good vritti, uh, you don't have to amplify. You should reach a state where the vrittis are quietened. That is the ideal state. So there is no question of amplifying the good vrittis. It's definitely better than amplifying the bad vrittis, but it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, so I take your leave now. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.